Hey folks, you know the drill. We'll wait a little bit for our guest to arrive and also for some other attendees, and then we're going to get started with our live today. Great, and we actually do have our guest. So without further ado, let me add Uma Fox to our live. Hey Uma,
How are you?
I'm good. Long time no chat.
Yeah.
I think the last time I saw you was before quarantine.
Yes, I think so too. I think we talked virtually a while ago about school desegregation,
Yeah.
but beyond that, haven't really talked. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for making the time this week. I know it's been really busy for you. So a little bit of background of our Activated Thursday series. We basically sit with a youth activist or an adult ally and provide a conversation that gives our attendees a concrete way of enacting change. And I'm super, super excited to invite you to our live today. We're nearing the end of Pride. And so I thought it'd be really great to kind of close out the last Activate Thursday during Pride to talk about the incredible win that you achieved in Montgomery County, Maryland, which is to or you actually spearheaded the passage of the first of its kind LGBTQ course in high schools and across the country, right? The first ever in the
Yes.
country. Yeah. So like snaps to that. That's amazing.
Same time, definitely.
Yeah, and as someone who grew up in Montgomery County, I'm super excited to talk to you about this because I wouldn't have imagined that this would be possible 10 years ago. So I'd love to just kind of start off asking you, how did this movement come about?
So it was something that definitely was very student led. From the start, I think normally we see that courses at the state level, at the county level, even at the national level, in terms of educational standards and new projects, tend to be led by teachers or tend to be led by adult activists who are paid by organizations, etc. But this was something that students came to me and asked me about. And then I kind of realized that I had both the adult connections within MCPS and kind of the organizational structure with MoCo Pride, which is our association of LGBTQ plus students, to make it happen. And so from the beginning, we had students from all around the district working on this, and then it finally got kind of previewed to the Board of Ed, who supported it, and then we started working on a one-to-one ratio with teachers on writing the course. And then it got passed in May. That was a big win for us, having it finally approved, and we're still working on the curriculum as we speak.
Wow. Okay, so how long did that entire process take?
I think it's a little under a year, so I think 10 months from today.
Okay. Yeah, that's actually not that long.
Yeah,
Um,
the courses can take 5 years, 6 years in general. The other crazy thing about this is normally when a course is first created, it gets piloted at like 2 schools. After the process, the next year, we're getting piloted at 10. So
mhm.
it's exciting to see just how much interest it's been, and that was by a volunteer sign up from teachers who wanted to teach it.
That is amazing. I have a lot of follow-up questions. I'm trying to figure out which one I want to ask you first. I think just to reiterate to our audience, the key thing that I got out of your statement there was that this is something that was student-led from the beginning. It's basically students were like, this is something that I want. This is the problem that I've identified. And you use that as a launching point. It wasn't like adults coming to you and saying, hey, this needs to happen. So I think that's key, right? So if I want to come up with like a 10-step plan or something to tell people how they can replicate these kinds of wins in their community, I would say number one, maybe it's like, identify a problem that you want to solve or identify a need that you have, right? And so from there, how would you break down the remaining steps to get to policy victory?
I think recently I've had to do this a lot with more students kind of contacting me and discussing this with me. Mind you, it really is students, not teachers or anyone else, who are asking me, how do I get this where I live? Or how do I get my curriculum to include LGBTQ plus studies in other ways? And so I would say the number one step after that is, who am I going to involve in this? Who are my allies and who are people who think like me? And so looking at first and foremost of who you can get on your team, and then also who you can extend your team to and kind of brand and market your team to. And so that was something really crucial for us. For me, it was kind of interesting because I had this pre-made team because I had already founded kind of an LGBTQ plus union. And then after the fact, looking at who I knew allies were kind of within like the system. And so knowing those people, knowing what those people cared about, and making sure to kind of lobby them effectively was something that was also super crucial.
Okay, so you'd say figure out the problem and then find allies and work with those allies to get it done. Or go ahead.
Really, really crucially, make sure those allies and also the people you're working with are representative of the cause and of the issue. So it's
Right.
about you. It's never really just a monolith of your experience, even if it is connected to you. And so make sure that you're looking for allies who are representative of so many different facets of what the problem is for the team that's representative.
So let me ask you about that. How did you ensure that your coalition was as diverse and intersectional as possible? And what are other considerations you had for inclusion?
So I think when I was first and foremost founding MoCo Pride, inclusivity and intersectionality were my number one concerns for the year and number one concerns for the structure of the organization. I did all of our content material and all social media branding in both Spanish and English because we have such a big population of Spanish speakers where I live. I did a lot of focus on making sure when people submitted their applications that I considered diversity of gender, diversity of sexuality, diversity of race, and diversity of ability. We're now in almost every single MoCo high school. And so we've kind of expanded and broadened ourselves to be almost everywhere regionally. And we've had a lot of racial diversity and a lot of diversity of experience in terms of the LGBTQ plus experience. Also, in terms of writing the course, it's been my number one priority to make it something representative of our student body. Something I'm really excited about introducing recently to the course is case studies on communities around the world that face LGBTQ plus discrimination, but also might have unique LGBTQ plus cultures, and are representative of big first generation or second generation immigrant groups in the DC area. So I'm trying to introduce case studies about Ethiopia, India, El Salvador, and Mexico right now into the course's curriculum to make sure that our LGBTQ plus students who might not be from the United States originally or might connect more with cultures beyond kind of the white United States have something they can do and are also part of our LGBTQ plus narrative here.
I love that, and I feel like, you know, when I hear you say that, it's like, well, duh, like curricula everywhere should be like that. But it's so innovative, right? Like, how much curricula do you see that is like that? So kudos to you.
I think when we first sat down to write it, I knew lots of people who were like, oh, this is going to be the LGBTQ plus US history course. And I was like, I don't really think of myself as an American queer by itself. Like, yes, I identify with some stuff, but the fact that I'm like a half South Asian, I really grew up in the South Asian community where being gay was much better respected for a much longer time than in Europe.
Yeah.
It's something important to me, and I think it's important to a lot of other students to highlight that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important point about how I'm also South Asian. My family's Bangladeshi, and so like I feel that like Hijra, the Hijra community were like long respected in our culture, and like it was really like colonialization and white supremacy that made homophobia a thing. And like even my family's Muslim too, and like Muslims are often thought of like really homophobic, but the time during like the Ottoman Empire, for example, all like the Sufi poets were queer. And yeah, no, so that I love that so much. So go ahead.
I just wanted to add on one quick thing. You just reminded me of that. My family's Sikh, and so we think of Sikhism as such like an insular community and such a community that's so homophobic, but there are records of Sikh people doing drag and doing drag in religious settings. And so really, no matter the time and place, there were always gay people, there were always queer people, and the big change that was colonization. Around the world, the majority of homophobic laws were created by colonization and during the colonial period, and that's not a coincidence.
Do you have any resources that you might want to recommend to folks to check out to learn more about that?
Yeah, I think one of the best ones is GLISTEN, which is, I cannot remember the acronym for the life of me, but it does a lot of stuff about LGBTQ plus curriculum and also even LGBTQ plus organization building. I would also say Huffington Post recently did a really good documentary series on being gay around the world and published a lot of good material about that. And so they did a whole documentary feature on the Hijra community in India, how it's expanding, how it's growing, what protections it has, and then also a really interesting publication that I think we don't often kind of talk about. It's definitely kind of part of the formalized media space, but isn't a like really frequent one that's listened to or read, is The Guardian, so the British newspaper. And they've actually hired a lot of people to do research into post-colonial LGBTQ plus policy around the world. And I have a lot of good resources about that if you just want to research in your own time.
That's awesome. Yeah, maybe we'll make a post later on so that we can get all those names. Well, one thing I also wanted to talk to you about, like I think people in America also forget the contributions of queer people of color in the history of the LGBTQ movement here. So can you talk a little bit about how that was involved in your advocacy, or how you're thinking about putting that into into the curriculum? I mean, I think it's specifically important too, like to talk about that during this month when, we've had Pride coincide with the uprisings related to the Black Lives Matter movement. It's like a lot of people struggle to talk about these two things in intersectional ways. And so I think it's really important to shed light, particularly in this time.
I think it's so important to remember that Pride was resistance and protest. Our current situation and the current growth of the Black Lives Matter movement is also resistance and revolution. And so I think it's been so important for people to recognize the parallels there, and also recognize the fact that Pride was not white. Like, Pride was not all white. It's been whitewashed by media, especially by corporate media and by capitalist media that have used it for profit. And I think we have to recognize that the people who really led Pride were New Yorkers of color. Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera were two of the biggest leaders of the Stonewall Riot, or Stonewall Revolution, I think, for a better word. And so I think it's so necessary to know that history and have that history be part of our mainstream consciousness.
Yeah, and so how are you referring to these figures in the curriculum? Like, how are you thinking about incorporating that?
But I think in our section about American history, we've made a really conscious effort to make it something that, especially around discussing both the AIDS epidemic and also Stonewall, is very focused on firsthand records from people of color. And so not just looking at it from the passive of someone who's observing it or learning the facts, but knowing the emotion behind it, and also knowing the people who created it were people of color, especially.
Right. So to transition a bit and to talk about you, because I think, one of the things that I understand about activism is that, like, the thing that draws you is something that could motivate other people. And so how did you get involved in all of this stuff in the first place? I mean, you started this particular movement with already having amassed contacts. So what was pre-activism UMA like?
Pre-activism UMA was very angry, like a lot of people, I think, who get into it. And angry about the same issues that we're seeing today, but didn't know that there was a way to get involved with that or a way to change it. And so it was a lot of passive anger that things were unfair, that I didn't really see myself in places, and I either just accepted it or found that I was mad and moved on. And so then realizing later in life that there was a way to get involved in this and to be more than just a passive experiencer was something that was so crucial to me. So I really started doing a lot of advocacy at the beginning of high school, first in school-wide clubs, then at the county-wide level, and the more formalized county institutions. And I still felt like a lot of the time those were either very tokenizing of students, and so it often was students being the sole representative of all of Montgomery County's students at the table, or it was a group that was majority white and majority straight. And so I then realized that there needed to be, and at the same time, we were seeing so much LGBTQ plus discrimination. We were continuing to see that, especially in Maryland State House, there continues to be so much LGBTQ plus just ignoring of the identity. And so I realized that there was this contradiction that we didn't really see LGBTQ plus voices or hear LGBTQ plus voices, but there was a definitive need for them. And so I started MoCo Pride at the end of my freshman year. I'm a sophomore now. And then the course came naturally out of that, and I continued a lot of that work with diversifying other spaces and helping other nonprofits in Montgomery County grow beyond the county's institution.
And so you talk about that you were angry, right? And I think a lot of young folks, they're angry about a lot of different things, but sometimes it's really hard to I had the same experiences when I was like a child and in middle school. Like, I felt like I wasn't represented either, and had really a lot, I wished that I was white, that's how bad it was for me. And so I had a lot of anger about being in American society, but I never really knew that activism was a pathway until, my personal story is that, someone showed me that this is a pathway. So how did you find out that activism was a pathway that you could channel your anger and actually produce change?
I think it was really happenstance. I know I grew up in a family that was involved in activism or was involved in kind of the academic forms of activism. I have cousins who have done like research into post-colonialism, et cetera, and kind of have used like the academy as a form of activism and a form of advocacy. I know my parents, my mom at least, was very committed to advocacy at a young age and like to educate me about that. But I think it really became coincidental as I went to a school kind of the down county, which is notorious for being less in terms of having less accessible options for advocacy. And so
Yeah.
I really didn't know about it until coincidence of kind of meeting more people who weren't from the down county, which is kind of the sad fact of it.
That's so sad.
And so it never was kind of really something homegrown. It was something I kind of had to export myself to, which is something I still reconcile with the fact that now, at least previously, I went to a school that wasn't in the down county for high school. Now I'm actually moving out of Montgomery County in general. And so I think it's been kind of interesting for me to see that, and it's been kind of a sad reality for a lot of people, that to be an active advocate, you have to either change your surroundings or you have to kind of who you are or how you present yourself.
So you, just to get the timeline straight, you started meeting other peers in about like middle school.
Mm-hmm.
And I also grew up in the down county or spent middle school and high school going to schools in down county and partly living there. And so this hits home for me too. And like, I had no idea. Well, so the high school that I went to Blair, right? So we had like an activism group there. There were people that are pretty active. So I feel like, but at that point I was already involved in activism. I think the key is, it sounds like even at the middle school level, there are a lot of kids that are doing activism in the up county. And yeah, I would definitely say my middle school was not like that.
I knew people who had done like the Junior Student Government Association in middle school. I had never heard of that.
Yeah.
That was not something possible. And I think when it kind of first occurred to me was probably at the end of 8th grade that I even existed. And so I think I probably found out about even doing it at the high school level from like a video that was sent to our school emails that I might have just checked by coincidence. And so it wasn't really something that was ever like said to me like, oh, like you would be good for this, or that this is possible, just because it was never something that was made accessible to my area.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess the takeaway for folks that are just joining us, really quickly, we're meeting with Uma Fox, who is an activist. She's, how old are you, by the way? 16? Mm-hmm. She's a 16-year-old activist from Montgomery County, Maryland, and she passed the country's first ever standardized LGBTQ curriculum for high school. And we were just talking about how you can get involved in activism, like where people's origins are. And a lot of times it's just not lack of opportunity is what prevents people from being involved. And so, you guys are like, if you're new to activism and you're watching this live or watching this later on when we put it on IGTV, like you can fix things in your community. Like if you see a problem, you have the power to change it. And, and there are resources abound that can help you do that. So, take advantage of all of that.
I'd actually just like to add one thing. I think a lot of it is both lack of opportunity and lack of things being marketed to people and targeted to people, but also I think something that I struggled with, and I've met with a lot of student advocates who struggled with, is feeling underqualified and having syndrome. I knew that I had ideas for activism clubs, etc., that I would have wanted to found, but I thought I don't have enough experience for this. I haven't been part of the county SGA that I couldn't have been part of anyway because it wasn't something that was accessible. I didn't have this experience. I don't talk like these people. I don't know these things. I didn't take this class. And I think is one of the things that is really harmful and that I've had to struggle with a lot, especially now that I'm doing more national and international activism, that often I'm not going to have a college degree that some of the people in the room have. I'm not going to be a scholar in LGBTQ plus studies, but I am going to know what my feelings are about and what my experience is. And that in and of itself was kind of how democracy was made, at least partially, to run, and kind of like to see. And so I think I've seen that a lot when students meet with their elected officials, that you should definitely do if you have the chance to. People feel like they're not qualified to talk about this, but these things are made to serve you. They're made for you at the decision-making table. And if they're not, that's a structural issue. And so you should not feel as though that's a problem. You should advocate instead for more accessibility, I think is kind of a key takeaway also about getting involved in advocacy.
Snaps. Oh my God, snaps to all of that. So you guys heard it. Get involved with policy advocacy. Contact your legislators. Follow UACT Project if you're not following already. we are going to provide more content to teach you how to do that. So please, like, do it. And that's one thing I wanted to really uplift was it's not rocket science. Like, you don't need a PhD to do this. You just need initiative and like people skills and you know, and then you'll figure it out. Like, just find allies, ask them how to do it, and you know, and it's really that simple. I mean, it's a little bit more complex than that, but that's just the great starting point, I think.
Yes.
Really quickly though, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Did you want to add something to that?
I mean, I'll just kind of reiterate, I think that it really is not that hard. You can read about it. You can figure out people's skills by practicing with other people. I'm not very good. I was not great at interviews for a long time. I figured out how to do it because I read stuff places and I practiced talking to people.
Yeah.
It's all practice. And if you make a faux pas, if talking to an elected official just doesn't feel right the first time, it gets better, honestly. And it kind of is something that you just have to continue and keep doing. And I think especially with both elected officials, it's their job to listen to you. So you don't have, you're not supposed to be perfect, and you're not getting hired or paid like them. You're not getting elected. You just have to be there. And I think with starting an organization, the more kind of supporters you have and the more people you connect with, the less pressure there is on you to look perfect all the time. So I'd also really advocate for collaborating and for delegating stuff.
Yes, snaps to delegate. I mean, Uma, this conversation can go on for an hour. Like, I just feel like there's so many directions I can take this in. But I did remember what I wanted to say. I love the point you made also about the importance of advocating like for more transparency and making the civic engagement process easier. Because quite frankly speaking, it is also like legislators are there for you to talk to them. And like, if you find a way to talk to them, they will listen to you. But they, you know, these structures are kind of hidden and shrouded on purpose, right? They're there to mainly meet the needs of the privileged. And so that is also very intentional and something we have to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think definitely that's the thing. It really is not something you can do in a whim. I don't know if you've ever tried to go on your state legislator's website. It is confusing.
Oh,
they are not made simply. They're not made bilingually or multilingually. It's inaccessible, period. Even it takes, I've been doing it for a long time, and sometimes it'll take me hours to find stuff. There's a reason that other hire interns because they look through that stuff, and I've been in that position too.
Yep.
And it really has to be something, once again, delegation. Sometimes there are people who can commit a lot to being the face of an organization. Sometimes there are people who can commit to kind of doing that work to find that stuff on those websites. So it is an unfortunate system to be in. It's always important to advocate for more transparency, and kind of the way that you can do that is by that delegation and by that collaboration.
100%. Like, I'm like, there's nothing I can add to that. So I know we're running out of time, so I'd also love to give the audience a chance to ask any questions if they do. But while you guys might be thinking, I'm going to ask you two questions. So it's been lauded, I mean, I said that a couple of times in this interview, that this is like the first of its kind class. How do you know that? How are you able to measure that, given the fact that like there are so many school districts in the United States?
So we've actually looked at the other, so there are LGBTQ plus studies courses that already existed. And GLSEN, that organization I mentioned previously, keeps a record of them because it is something that's kind of unique. However, the big difference is that they've all been in private schools or at public magnet schools or at public charter schools. So this is the only time that there's a district that has implemented a comprehensive curriculum.
Okay, cool. And what was that source again? GLSEN. Okay. Is that like LSTN or?
LSEN, so GLSEN. Like if something.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay, yes, we'll put that in our graphic. And then you had mentioned how like it happened in 10 months. You had way more teachers sign up than you expected, indicating this kind of like a ridiculous amount of support, right? Like this has been a long time coming. So do you think that was the main reason why it took that little time? Like it was just kind of, you were at the sweet spot of a moment to make it happen? Or are there other factors?
I think there are a couple. I think there's the logistical part. That's the more people you have on hand, the faster it's going to move. I think there was a lot of community interest. It got a decent amount of publicity, and I think it was kind of the sweet spot where we were in the middle of quarantine. there hadn't been a lot of change besides the fact that COVID-19 was happening. And so having something like that would be this nice inspiring burst also. And I think that's one of the reasons it got passed in May.
And how many people were involved in your coalition? That's something I want to clarify.
About 10 teachers and 10 students.
So not a lot of people.
Yeah, it's really not a lot. It starts pretty small. It really, when you're writing courses, I've been in the process of reviewing complete English and history courses for the entire MCPS from the elementary to middle school level. That's a process that can have like 300 people in a room, hearing pitches from different, and it's a lot less intimate and it has a lot less opportunity for growth and for inclusion. And so a lot of the time with these bigger general education things that aren't electives and aren't being piloted by the curriculum or by the county itself, it's much, you kind of just take what you can get. You ask some questions about inclusivity, but you're often getting a product that's not very inclusive. But this, kind of because it's at a grassroots level, had a lot of potential for us to change it and for us to influence what was going on there.
And, you know, I would also say it's, you know, this is indicative of how I've heard from many like young activists that it's not even about young and old actually. So it's not even about the numbers. It's just a persistent group of people can also make something happen too. That being said, you know, there are moments where you do want to focus on organizing and getting folks to advocate. And when would you know if that's the kind of strategy you need to do?
It really depends. I think for me, this was interesting because it was kind of a project under my organization. And so MoCo Pride itself does a lot more than the studies course. It does a lot of other advocacy, and we have about 65 members. And so we're kind of big enough to be able to do that delegating and focus on other things. And so you have some other people who can definitely be doing this at a certain amount of time, but then you also have other people who can focus on other things, like lobbying Maryland for an end of trans panic, which should have happened years ago.
Right.
Or working on an Activism piece or getting speakers for a panel. And so because of that, and I think because we kind of started as an organization and as a union, this could be a project that was delegated and didn't have to be our whole focus. But there are definitely times when organizations can be started by activists just for the purpose of getting one thing passed. And that can, but it's when there's kind of a more general issue. In this case, it was persistent exclusion of LGBTQ plus youth that needs to be solved, that you have to kind of do that delegating.
Yeah. Okay, great. And yeah, I guess that's pretty much it. I don't see any questions. So let me just ask, like, are there any final words that you'd like to share? Like any kind of, if folks take away one thing or three things from this interview, what would you say those are?
I would say number one, you deserve to be in whatever space, be it academia, school education, policy, that you need to be in or you think you need to be in. You deserve to be there and you deserve to be part of it. I would also say practice makes perfect. So keep kind of practicing and keep advocating. And once again, find those allies. Find your supporters, and like also not even just allies who might not be directly impacted by the cause, but find people who are directly impacted by this and share your experience or might have slightly different experiences and work together on common solutions.
Awesome. And we actually do have one question that I think is still kind of answered by that, but we'll try to answer it a little bit more detail. So Yexi asks, what and where should I get involved in? And so, I mean, I think the what is like, what are the issues? So how do you, if you don't know what the issue is, how do you figure that out? How would you recommend people like find out? Like if they want to create change, but there's just like so many ways they can do so, how can you narrow into that?
I think it's really two things. Think about what you're connected to. I think this is something I've written about a lot and I've talked about quite recently, definitely after kind of Black Lives Matter has grown and it being part of the mainstream, is that there is so much, but there's so much to be mad about. There's so many issues, but finding ones that your experience can be connected to is so much more powerful, I think. And also make sure that you're not taking time or space away from the voices that are most connected to it or need to have the most connection or need to be uplifted the most. And so first looking at what does your identity connect to? What is going at the end of the day, what policies and what things are going to directly impact you every single day? From there, when a lot of the time there's still so much that can be encompassed by that, then looking just at what really strikes you when you're reading something, when you're watching something, what makes you kind of either feel the most passion or feel the angriest, to what policy choices get you the most excited, I think can be a good place to start, definitely.
And I think part of that also, just to add on to that a little bit, it's also important to maybe like talk to different people in your community and ask them like, what would they like and what do they feel like are problems in their school or what have you. And for example, and then go outside of your school bubble. I mean, Uma, for example, you talked about how you met other activists in like other parts of the county and you saw that they had more opportunity than you did. And I think in the down county, you also see, for example, like there was a group that we worked with that had the opportunity to go to like a different school, and they noticed that they had like functional water fountains, and at Kennedy they didn't, right? And so like keep your eyes peeled for these problems, and it doesn't take long to find them, right? Just if you go out of your bubble, you'll find them.
Add on to that with a little bit of a self-promo.
Yeah, please.
Recently, so I'm actually moving out of Montgomery County this summer. I'm moving to Hong Kong to do other advocacy work there with a bunch of other international students. And one of my co-years and I have actually kind of founded a new initiative for the summer and hopefully going into the rest of the year called Oriya, that's basically doing workshops about race and systematic oppression for youth all around the world. So we currently have about 25 different countries represented. If you're interested in that, I think it's a really great way to get outside of your bubble, where we're talking about a lot of very common issues with students from all around the world and looking at comparisons. We're doing one this Sunday about Black Lives Matter in the UK, Hong Kong, the US, and a bunch of different countries, and how racism intersects all of our lives regardless of where you live. And so kind of things like that and opportunities like that, it's not just my organization, but check them out. Check out other things to really get beyond your bubble, even virtually right now.
That makes me so happy to hear, because honestly, the Youth Activism Project, our origins were in international advocacy, and that's something that we're dying to do. We're dying to do more international connections and seeing just how common our struggles are. So I will tell my team to promote the heck out of your organization. What's it called again?
So it's called Youthoriya. So it's like you, like Y-O-U, and then T-H-E-O-R-I-A. So like youth in theory. Basically.
Okay. And we will definitely, I wish I had like if I had a stand, I would be like typing things. And also, Yasi, thank you so much for your question and your participation. But we will definitely, everything that we talked about in this interview, will make sure that we're going to create resources around them and also obviously promote your organization. But yeah, I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and thank Uma especially. We went a little over the promised 30 minutes, but I just want to leave you with one thing. And just, I particularly wanted to interview you. We try to get youth to interview as much as possible. But I'm just like, I'm going to try not to cry, but like I said, I grew up in Montgomery County, or I went to Montgomery County Public Schools like 11 years ago. And in high school, I struggled a lot with my sexuality. And I feel like if I had a class like that, it would have helped me so much. So thank you so much for the work that you did. It just really reminds us, like sometimes we look at just how messed up the world is, and we realize that like, and we're just like, are we making progress? Like, I don't even know. And your story is an indication that we are. So thank you for keeping that fight.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we can have you back and talk more about activism. I love this conversation. And everyone, it's so easy to get involved in activism. Just follow our organizations, and we're going to show you how to do it. So, Bye, everyone.
Thank you.